This is beautiful Mora, New Mexico, located in the valley nestled in San Andres del Cristo Mountains of northern New Mexico. This is where my mom spent her entire childhood, a small discourse community of mostly Spanish-speaking Hispaniola families dating back to the 1800s. It is a small town mostly made up of farmers and ranchers. People in this community are proud of being from Mora, and many prefer that this small town stays just the way it is, unbothered by outsiders and untapped economically. Generations of families have lived here their whole lives, and it will probably stay that way forever. Many people in this community have their own unique way of speaking, both in Spanish and English. The dialect of their Spanish is a mixture of Old Spanish, with a blend of a unique norteño slang only found in these parts of the state. Often their Spanish is mixed with English to form a more of a Spanglish dialect, which happens so naturally that everyone except outsiders seem to understand what each other is saying perfectly. My mother often uses phrases in English and Spanish that only I hear from her and others in Mora. Spanish words like or oy, Dios mío, ay often come out when she is frustrated. English words pronounced sandwich instead of sandwich, going down instead of going to town, and landed up instead of ended up are understood by others in the community, but may puzzle or cause giggles by anyone else who wasn't familiar in the dialect. While my mother now lives outside of this community and only visits her family often, the language of ways of her discourse community are ingrained in her forever. When people say, I knew you had to be from Mora just by the way you talk, she proudly grins and says, Yes, I am. In this segment, I will be interviewing my mom about growing up in her discourse community. Hey mom, what were positives and negatives about growing up in such a small community?
Well, growing up in my discourse community, I really didn't know how unique the community actually was. The fact that my great grandparents, my grandparents, my tias and my tios, cousins and friends all lived within miles of each other, and we could see each other almost anytime we wanted by walking to each other's houses whenever we wanted, didn't necessarily seem special at the time. Little did I know that it wasn't that way for everyone. Although I traveled outside my community on occasions, I really wasn't exposed to the outside world in order to recognize that not everyone talked like me and not everyone had the same values as most people in my community. This was both good and bad. I was lucky enough to have a close knit community of family and friends, but I was somewhat isolated from the outside world. Also, the community was small enough that everyone knew each other and knew everything that was going on in everyone's life, and it still exists that way today.
What made you leave the community?
As I grew older and went to college, I became more exposed to people who weren't from my area. In turn, I became more interested in the differences that existed outside of my community. I found myself drawn to those differences and, in a way, strayed from my community, its beliefs, its language, and its culture. That was good and bad. I learned that other cultures existed and my appreciation for diversity grew. At the same time, my appreciation for my own community lessened and I found myself conforming to dialects other than my own.
That's very nice. What is your relationship with your discourse community? And now, do you have any regrets?
Well, it wasn't until I left New Mexico and moved to Texas that I truly missed and appreciated the community I had left behind. I realized how special and unique things like food, culture, and the pride of the community were. When I do visit, and I do visit often, there is an instant connection to what was and what still is. The one thing I regret is that while my parents and generations before them fluently spoke Spanish, I wish they had spoken more to me in conversation so that I could be more fluent myself. I'm fortunate, though, that I understand the language when elders speak around me. but I wish I had learned the dialect enough to be fluent myself. I do value where I come from now more than ever, and I love that my children appreciate the beauty of Mora and all of its cultural richness too. I'm glad that the community stays as it is because I know they can go there and it is pretty close to how it has always been.
That is very nice. Thank you for telling us about yourself today, and we'll get back to you next time. This concludes the project. I am proud to be able to see where my mom came from and learn more about of where she grew up and who she grew up with. And this was a very fun experience. Thank you.